Firstly, you tell us a bit about yourself and Touchstone and your role within Touchstone?
Right, I'm currently one of the operations directors at Touchstone. I've been there for nearly 8 years. And a bit about Touchstone. Touchstone's been going for about nearly 40 years as an organisation, so it's a charity. Its headquarters based in Leeds. And what Touchstone does is primarily provide mental health and wellbeing services. And it's anything from the preventative side right up the high intensity level where we work with people in hospitals. And we currently have about 250 staff,
Yeah.
and we're supported by 100 volunteers. And in terms of our Black minority ethnic makeup, a third of our service users are Black minority ethnic. And in terms of our staffing, it's around 40%. So that's a bit about Touchstone. And my role in that is to support the managers and their services to meet our contract targets, but to ensure that our services meet the needs of our service users and the community.
Yeah. Do you enjoy your role there?
Yes, I do. It brings a lot of satisfaction because we deal with people who are having challenging times in their life.
Mm.
So it gives a great satisfaction that in any way I can contribute to anyone's happiness. And also from my own personal experience, I've had a life experience around mental health. So it's a place where I feel at home with,
Yeah.
comfortable, and there's no stigma around mental health. And that's why we have a very diverse workforce. We recognise people's life experiences and identities. So yes, I actually love working for Touchstone.
Good. Good. That's always a good thing. What has been the impact of the pandemic on mental health, particularly within the South Asian communities?
Well, the pandemic, apart from the physical health issues
Yeah.
of the COVID-19 virus, it's had a very adverse impact in terms of mental health. And the impact we're only beginning to really realise now. The impact is likely to be long term. And what we've identified across the board, people are feeling more lonely, feeling more isolated, feeling detached from their work and social networks, which are crucial to keep your well-being
Yeah.
well. So yeah, there's been a rise in demand in terms of referrals and supports. And one of the things we've done in Touchstone is something called Touchstone Loves Food, where we recognise very early on our clients, apart from their mental health conditions, didn't even have food. There was food poverty and the impact that has on people. And in terms of the South Asian community, and it's well documented now, the pandemic itself has had a disproportionate impact. And some of the early reports and data, for example, 60% of all the NHS staff who passed away early on were Black minority ethnic.
Yeah.
And they only account for 20%. And in that proportion is a huge proportion of people from a South Asian background. So there's a clear documented evidence there is a disproportionate impact on particular communities. And there is evidence in terms of South Asian communities more likely to be hospitalised and more likely to die. So these are
Yeah.
facts. And that in turn starts to have an impact on people's well-beings around fears, anxieties, and so on. And the double whammy is the impact economically. Many in the South Asian communities are self-employed. They
Yeah.
work in the gig economy, taxi drivers, hospitality, and so on. When you start losing your job, your money, that then has an impact on your well-being. Debt,
Yeah,
for
of course it
example, is a
does.
major
Yeah.
trigger in
Yeah.
terms of mental health. So in particular for the South Asian community, it's been a double whammy. So
Yeah.
the physical impacts of COVID, we're also recognizing the economic impact of COVID, especially in those sectors where the South Asian community is overpopulated, around hospitality, things like taxi driving and so on.
Yeah.
And that's had an impact on families where
Yeah.
there's less money. But then it's obviously had an impact on people's well-being and mental health. So what's
Yeah.
happened during this COVID, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we wouldn't have a new set of service users or clients who otherwise may never have suffered mental health.
Mm.
So this is a new cohort of people that are now have got mental health conditions as a result of COVID. And I would say it's probably more compounded in the South Asian communities.
Yeah. What are some of the institutional barriers faced by BME communities when accessing mental health services?
Just want to take a step back. A broader issue is the Black Lives Matter campaign, which actually highlights the institutional and structural inequalities, discrimination, racism that exists across a number of services, sectors, law enforcement, and so on. So mental health is no different in that context.
Yeah.
And part of it is people of that background are not on those jobs or not in key decision-making roles. So that's just a broader issue, just to understand some of the what I would say structural inequalities that exist in many institutions in this country.
Yeah.
In terms of the mental health issue in particular, if you look at the figures, what you tend to find is people from a Black minority ethnic community are less likely to access primary care services. So that's the primary care services where you go to your GP, you've got issues around depression. But, and this is well documented, when it comes to hospitals, Black minority ethnic people are overpopulated, are more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I think for South Asian, it's up to 3-4 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And for African Caribbean, it's 5 times and more. So
do you think... Sorry.
No, sorry, carry on, Jill.
I'm wondering if they didn't sort of miss out the primary step, that there'd be less in hospital. Do you understand?
Of course, and this is the whole issue here. So the problem is there are some barriers in primary care. So for some reason, you've got this client group which is overpopulated, where there's no choice, where there's a bit of enforcement, but where people shouldn't end up in hospitals. If there's a preventative way of doing things, it saves a lot of money, but also it's better for the individual. And for South Asian communities in particular, is to recognise the importance of preventative and what can happen in the primary care bit. And some of the barriers, the obvious ones people always say, oh, it's language. That's a usual thing that often people say. But I think it's far more complicated in that rather than it's cultural.
Yeah,
language.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yes, and I think one of the reasons is the way, part of it is the organisations who deliver these services are not necessarily representative of the communities they serve. And in a way, why we do it in Touchstone is not because we've got very good strategies, which we have, is our workforce is representative of the communities that we serve, and that's really important. And if that's not there in the first place, no matter how good your strategies sound, it's going to be quite a challenge. So people end up seeing, for example, CBT therapists, which are cognitive behaviour therapists, you're more likely to see a white person.
I know all about CBT.
Yeah, and people will not see someone from their background. There's issues around barriers related to people's cultural needs, and for example, for Asian women, in particular Muslim women, it's gender specific.
Yeah.